I was sitting in the emergency room waiting area of St. Mary's Hospital in Phoenix, watching my wife of 12 years get her wrist x-rayed after what she said was a simple fall down our garage steps. But when Nurse Rachel Morrison quietly pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm and whispered, "Mr. Chun, check your home security cameras from 3 days ago, Tuesday afternoon around 2 p.m., my blood ran cold. As a cybersecurity analyst for the past 15 years, I'd installed a comprehensive surveillance system throughout our house 6 months earlier. State-of-the-art, motion-activated, cloud backup, the works. But I hadn't checked the footage in weeks. I trusted my wife. I trusted our marriage. That trust was about to be shattered in ways I never imagined possible. Before I tell you what those cameras revealed and why a complete stranger risked her job to warn me, I need you to do something. Comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. Because what I discovered in those recordings didn't just end my marriage. It exposed a predator who'd done this before, and I only had 72 hours to stop her from doing it again. Thursday evening, 6:47 p.m. The Arizona sun was setting through the floor-to-ceiling windows of St. Mary's Emergency Department, painting everything in shades of amber and red. I've been sitting in this uncomfortable plastic chair for 2 hours, ever since my wife Sarah called me at work, her voice shaking with pain. "Marcus," I fell down the garage steps. "My wrist, I think it's broken. Can you meet me at St. Mary's?" I left my desk at Sentinel Security Solutions immediately, my mind racing through the possibilities. Sarah was usually so careful. She was a yoga instructor, flexible, balanced, always aware of her body. A fall seemed unlike her. But accidents happen, right? The ER was moderately busy for a Thursday. A kid with a suspected broken arm, an elderly man with chest pains, a construction worker with a gashed hand. Normal emergency room chaos. I checked in with the triage nurse, been told Sarah was with the radiologist, and settled in to wait. That's when Nurse Rachel Morrison approached. I'd noticed her earlier, mid-30s, auburn hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, dark circles under her eyes that suggested too many double shifts. She'd been watching me from the nurse's station with an expression I couldn't quite read. Concern? Pity? Something else? She walked past my chair, stumbled slightly, and caught herself on the armrest. In that moment of seemingly clumsy recovery, she pressed something into my palm. A folded piece of paper, warm from her pocket. "Sorry," she said loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear. "Long shift. I'm getting clumsy." But her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten. Then she leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Chun, check your home security cameras from 3 days ago. Tuesday afternoon around 2 p.m. Don't tell your wife I said anything. Just check." Before I could respond, she straightened up and walked away, disappearing through a set of double doors marked "Staff Only." My hand closed around the paper, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked around. No one seemed to have noticed our interaction. I carefully unfolded the note in my lap, angling it away from the other people in the waiting area. The handwriting was hurried but clear. "Your wife's fall wasn't an accident. Check cameras. Protect yourself. I've seen this before. She's done this 3 times at this hospital. Same story. I can't say more. They watch us. Delete this note. R." The words blurred as I read them twice, 3 times. "Your wife's fall wasn't an accident. She's done this 3 times. My mind rejected it immediately. This was insane. Sarah and I had been together for 14 years, married for 12. We'd built a life together. A home in Scottsdale with a pool and a garden she loved. 2 dogs, Pixel and Bite. We were talking about starting a family next year. But Nurse Morrison had risked her job to warn me. Why would she do that if it wasn't serious? I pulled out my phone, opened the Secure Home app that connected to our camera system. My hands were shaking. I had to try 3 times to enter my password correctly. The app loaded slowly, showing me the live feeds first. Our living room, empty. The kitchen, clean and quiet. The garage, Sarah's Lexus missing because she'd driven it to the hospital. The backyard, where Pixel and Bite were probably sleeping in their doghouse. Everything looked normal. Everything looked like home. I navigated to the archived footage, scrolling back 3 days to Tuesday afternoon. The timestamp read 1:58 p.m. I was at work in a meeting about a client's network vulnerability assessment. Sarah had the day off between her morning and evening yoga classes. I selected the garage camera and hit play. What I saw made me forget to breathe. At 2:03 p.m., Sarah entered the garage from the house. She was wearing her yoga clothes, but she wasn't going to teach a class. She was carrying something. I zoomed in on my phone screen, squinting at the small image. A wooden mallet, the kind we kept in a utility closet for furniture assembly. Sarah looked around the garage carefully, checking corners, scanning for something. Then she positioned herself at the top of our 3 garage steps, the ones that led down from the door. What happened next unfolded with horrifying clarity. Sarah raised the mallet, hesitated, raised it again. Then, with deliberate force, she brought it down on her own left wrist. The impact made her stagger, her face contorting in pain. But she didn't stop. She hit her wrist again, and again. 3 times total, each strike measured and controlled. Then she carefully placed the mallet back against the wall, composed herself despite obvious pain, and staged what came next. She positioned herself at the top of the steps, turned sideways, and simply sat down hard on the edge of the top step. Then she rolled, letting her body tumble down all 3 steps in a controlled fall that looked dramatic but avoided her head entirely. She lay there for a moment at the bottom, breathing hard, cradling her injured wrist. Then she pulled out her phone and made the call I'd received 20 minutes later. The video ended. I sat in the ER waiting room, staring at my phone, my entire reality fracturing. My wife had deliberately broken her own wrist. She'd staged a fall. She called me crying, making me rush from work, making me worry. Why? Mr. Chun, a different nurse appeared in front of me, clipboard in hand. Your wife is ready to see you. Room 7. I stood up automatically, my legs moving while my mind was still trying to process what I just witnessed. I pocketed my phone, crumpled Nurse Morrison's note in my fist, and followed the nurse down a corridor that suddenly felt like it was tilting. Room 7's curtain was pulled partially closed. Through the gap, I could see Sarah sitting on an examination table, her left wrist wrapped in a temporary splint, her face pale but composed. "Marcus," she said when she saw me, and her voice cracked with what sounded like genuine relief. "Thank God you're here." I stepped into the room, and for the first time in 12 years of marriage, I looked at my wife and had no idea who she was. The doctor arrived moments after I did. Dr. Patricia Holloway, according to her badge, 50s, efficient manner, the kind of ER physician who'd seen everything twice. She clipped Sarah's x-rays onto a light box and flipped it on. "Definitely fractured," Dr. Holloway said, pointing to a clear break line in the radius bone. "Clean break," which is actually good news. It should heal well with proper casting and rest. She turned to Sarah. "You said you fell down your garage steps?" "Yes," Sarah nodded, her voice small and pained. "I was carrying a laundry basket, couldn't see my feet properly. I just tumbled, put my hand out to catch myself." She demonstrated with her good hand, showing how she'd tried to break her fall. The lie came so smoothly, so naturally, like she practiced. Dr. Holloway made notes. "Any loss of consciousness? Hit your head at all?" "No, nothing like that. Just my wrist took all the impact." "Good. We'll get you set up with a cast. You need to wear it for 6 to 8 weeks. Then we'll x-ray again to make sure it's healing properly. I'm going to prescribe pain medication, something strong for the first few days." Pain medication. The thought appeared in my mind like a neon sign. Is that what this was about? Was my wife staging injuries to get prescription opioids? But that didn't make sense. Sarah had never shown any signs of addiction. She barely drank alcohol. She was obsessive about clean eating and natural remedies. Prescription drug abuse seemed completely out of character, unless I didn't know her character at all. "Mr. Chun, I'll need you to help her at home for the next few days," Dr. Holloway continued. "She won't be able to drive for a while, and simple tasks like showering and dressing will be difficult. Do you have any questions?" I had about 1,000 questions, but none I could ask here. "No," I managed. "We'll figure it out." After Dr. Holloway left to arrange the casting, Sarah reached for my hand with her good one. Her palm was warm, familiar. "I'm sorry you had to leave work for this. I feel so stupid." "Don't apologize," I said automatically. Accidents happen. But I was thinking about Nurse Morrison's note. She's done this 3 times at this hospital. Same story. 3 times. Sarah had done this 3 times before. When? How had I not known? How long had this been going on? The casting took another 40 minutes. A technician wrapped Sarah's wrist and forearm in layers of fiberglass, creating a rigid purple cast that Sarah said was her favorite color. She smiled weakly at me while they worked, playing the role of the embarrassed patient who'd made a clumsy mistake. I smiled back, my face feeling like a mask. At 9:15 p.m., we walked out to the parking lot together. The Arizona night was cool, a relief after the day's heat. Sarah leaned against me slightly, exhausted from pain and the ordeal. I put my arm around her shoulders, the gesture automatic after years of marriage. "Thank you for being here," she said softly as I helped her into the passenger seat of my Tesla. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The words should have warmed me. Instead, they felt like ice water down my spine. I drove us home in relative silence, Sarah dozing against the window, exhausted from pain medication they'd given her. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen on the camera footage. She's done this 3 times. As soon as we got home, I needed to check the archive footage more carefully. I needed to see if there were other incidents I'd missed. And I needed to figure out why my wife was breaking her own bones. The thought was so absurd it almost made me laugh. Except nothing about this situation was funny. We pulled into our garage at 9:47 p.m. The same garage where, 3 days ago, my wife had taken a mallet to her own wrist. I looked at those 3 steps leading up to the house door, and they looked different now. Not innocent. Sinister. "I'll help you inside," I said, keeping my voice gentle, normal. "I can manage," Sarah insisted, but she let me steady her anyway as we climbed those 3 steps. She winced with each movement, cradling her cast close to her body. Pixel and Bite greeted us at the door, tails wagging frantically. They were Australian shepherds, smart and observant. Pixel immediately went to Sarah, sniffing her cast with concern. Bite stayed with me, leaning against my leg in that way he did when he sensed I was upset. "Good boys," Sarah murmured, petting Pixel with her good hand. "Mama's okay, just a little hurt." The domestic scene felt surreal. My wife, who'd deliberately broken her own arm, petting our dog and calling herself Mama. Everything looked normal on the surface, but underneath, something was fundamentally wrong. "You should get to bed," I said. "I'll take care of the dogs and lock up." "Are you sure?" "I can help." "Sarah, you have a broken wrist. Let me handle it tonight." She nodded, looking grateful. "You're right. I'm exhausted anyway. The pain meds are making me fuzzy." She kissed my cheek, her lips dry. "I love you, Marcus." "Love you too," I said automatically, and hated myself for how easily the lie came. I watched her disappear into our bedroom, Pixel following her loyally. The door closed with a soft click. Then I turned to Bite, who was still watching me with those intelligent brown eyes. "Stay," I whispered. I went to my home office, a small room off the living room where I kept my work setup. 3 monitors, a high-end PC, and the hub for our entire home security system. I closed the door, sat down at my desk, and pulled up the secure home archives on my main monitor. If Sarah had done this 3 times before at St. Mary's Hospital, there should be evidence. Previous incidents. Previous accidents. I started scrolling backward through the archive footage, looking for anything unusual. The system kept recordings for 90 days before automatically deleting them to make room for new footage. 90 days. 3 months of my wife's life, recorded in high definition across 8 cameras positioned throughout our house. At 11:30 p.m., after 2 hours of searching, I found the second incident. 6 weeks ago, early September, Tuesday afternoon again, same time frame, around 2 p.m. when I was at work. This time, Sarah was in our kitchen. She was alone, the house quiet. She opened the drawer where we kept kitchen linens and pulled out a thin dish towel. Then she did something that made my stomach turn. She wrapped the dish towel around her right hand, patting it carefully. Then she opened a lower cabinet and removed a cast iron skillet, one of the heavy ones Sarah used for searing steaks. I watched, my mouth dry, as my wife positioned her towel-wrapped hand on the kitchen counter, palm down. She raised the skillet, hesitated, raised it again. Then she brought it down on her own hand with controlled force. The impact was silent on the security footage, but I could see Sarah's body jerk, her face contort. She'd hit the back of her hand between the knuckles and wrist. She stood there for a moment, breathing hard, examining the damage. Then she carefully returned the skillet to the cabinet, unwrapped her hand, and threw the dish towel in the washing machine. 10 minutes later, according to the timestamp, she called me at work. I remember that call. "Marcus, I need you." I was putting away groceries, and a can of soup fell out of the cabinet and landed right on my hand. "I think something's broken. Can you meet me at urgent care?" We'd gone to a different facility that time, not St. Mary's. A walk-in clinic in Tempe. They'd x-rayed her hand, found a hairline fracture in one of the metacarpal bones, and given her a splint to wear for 3 weeks. She'd been apologetic and embarrassed about her clumsiness. I believed her completely. Why wouldn't I? People have accidents all the time. Except it wasn't an accident. My hand was shaking as I scrolled back further, looking for the first incident, the one that started this pattern. I found it at 1:30 a.m. 3 months ago, late July. The footage was from our bedroom camera, which I'd installed primarily for security, positioning it to cover the window and door rather than the bed itself. We'd joked about how paranoid I was, turning our home into Fort Knox with all the cameras and security measures. Now I was grateful for that paranoia. The bedroom footage showed Sarah getting out of bed around 2 a.m. while I was asleep. She left the room quietly, and I tracked her through the house cameras. She went to the garage, spent several minutes out there, then returned to bed. I switched to the garage camera for that time period. What I saw made me physically ill. Sarah had taken a hammer from my tool bench. Not a mallet this time, but a proper claw hammer, steel head with handle. She'd positioned herself against the garage wall, taken several deep breaths like she was preparing for something difficult, then deliberately slammed the hammer into her own shin. The force was considerable. I could see her leg buckle, see her bite down on what looked like a rolled-up towel to muffle any sound. She'd hit her shin 3 times, each impact measured and controlled. Then she cleaned up, hidden the towel, returned the hammer to its proper place, and gone back to bed. The next morning, she'd woken up complaining of severe leg pain. "I must have banged it on something during the night," she'd said, examining the massive bruise that was forming. "Maybe when I got up to use the bathroom. I don't remember, but it hurts like hell." We'd gone to the ER. Not St. Mary's that time, but Phoenix General. They'd x-rayed her leg, found no fracture, given her crutches and pain medication for the deep tissue bruising, and sent us home. 3 incidents. 3 deliberate self-injuries. Each one carefully staged to look like an accident. Each one resulting in a trip to the emergency room or urgent care. Each one getting her prescription pain medication. But I still didn't understand why. Sarah wasn't acting like an addict. She wasn't taking more pills than prescribed. She wasn't doctor shopping or showing any behavioral changes. She went to work, taught her yoga classes, came home, lived her life normally. So what was this about? I minimized the security footage and opened a new browser window. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Then I typed, "Munchausen syndrome, self-injury attention." The search results filled my screen with medical articles and case studies. I started reading, and with each paragraph, the pieces began clicking into place. Munchausen syndrome, a psychiatric disorder in which people deliberately produce, feign, or exaggerate symptoms of illness in themselves to gain attention, sympathy, or reassurance. Sometimes they injure themselves. Sometimes they fake symptoms. Sometimes they manipulate medical tests. The pattern was clear: repeated injuries or illnesses, extensive medical knowledge, eagerness to undergo tests and procedures, attention-seeking behavior with medical staff, and inconsistent stories about symptoms. Sarah fit almost every criterion. But why? What was driving this? What was she getting from these staged accidents besides pain and broken bones? I kept reading, digging deeper into case studies and psychiatric literature. The motivation section made me pause. Patients with Munchausen syndrome often have underlying issues related to childhood trauma, abandonment, or neglect. The medical attention they receive fulfills a deep psychological need for care and concern. The patient role becomes a way to receive love and attention they feel unable to obtain through normal relationships. Sarah's childhood had been difficult. I knew that much. Her father had left when she was 6. Her mother had been emotionally distant, focused on her own career. Sarah had essentially raised herself, and she rarely talked about those years. Was this connected? Had something in her past created this need for medical attention and care? The clock on my computer screen read 2:17 a.m. I'd been researching for hours. My eyes burned with exhaustion, but my mind was wide awake, racing with implications. If Sarah had Munchausen syndrome, she was sick. Not in the way she was claiming to doctors, but genuinely psychologically ill. She needed help, not judgment. But Nurse Morrison's note had said something else that kept nagging at me. She's done this 3 times at this hospital. I've seen this before. If Sarah had only injured herself 3 times, and I just documented all 3, why would Nurse Morrison specifically mention St. Mary's Hospital 3 times? Sarah had only been to St. Mary's once, tonight, for her wrist. Unless this wasn't about Sarah's own medical treatment at all. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I pulled up the Secure Home app again, this time looking at more recent footage the past 2 weeks. I started with a living room camera, scanning through hours of recordings at high speed, looking for anything unusual. At 3 a.m., I found it. 10 days ago, Sunday afternoon, Sarah was in our living room with someone I didn't recognize at first. A woman, elderly, maybe 70, thin and frail looking. They were sitting on our couch, talking, the older woman holding a cup of tea Sarah had made. I turned up the volume on the recording. "Really appreciate you checking on me," the elderly woman was saying. "Ever since my daughter moved to Seattle, I don't have many visitors." "It's no trouble at all, Margaret," Sarah replied warmly. "You're right next door. And at your age, you need someone looking in on you regularly. Have you been taking your blood pressure medication?" Margaret, our neighbor, the widow who lived in the house to our left, behind the tall hedge we'd never bothered to trim. I'd seen her maybe twice in the 2 years since we'd moved in. Sarah occasionally mentioned checking on her, being neighborly. I thought it was sweet. Now I watched my wife refresh Margaret's tea, adding something from a small bottle she pulled from her pocket. The motion was subtle, practiced. Margaret didn't notice, continuing to talk about her health problems, her loneliness, her gratitude for Sarah's friendship. They talked for another 20 minutes. Then Margaret stood to leave, wobbled slightly, and Sarah immediately steadied her. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just a little dizzy," Margaret said. "Maybe I stood up too fast." "Let me walk you home," Sarah insisted. "I don't want you falling." They left together, and I switched to our doorbell camera, watching them walk across our front lawn toward Margaret's house. Sarah had her arm around the older woman's waist, supportive and caring. I felt sick. I fast-forwarded through the next few days of footage. 3 days after that visit, I found Sarah checking on Margaret again. This time, Margaret looked worse. Pale, weak, complaining of nausea and dizziness. "I think you need to see a doctor," Sarah said, her voice full of concern. "These symptoms aren't normal. Let me take you to the ER. I don't want to bother." "Margaret, you're not bothering anyone. Your health matters. Please, let me drive you." And she had. Sarah had taken Margaret to St. Mary's Hospital, stayed with her through the examination, held her hand while doctors ran tests. I pulled out my phone and searched for news from the past week, adding Phoenix and elderly woman to the query. The article was from 6 days ago. Local news, small story. Scottsdale woman, 73, hospitalized after suspected poisoning. Margaret Halverson, a 73-year-old Scottsdale resident, remains in stable condition at St. Mary's Hospital after being admitted with symptoms consistent with digoxin toxicity. Police are investigating how Mrs. Halverson, who takes digoxin for a heart condition, ingested what doctors believe was an overdose. Mrs. Halverson lives alone and has no immediate family in the area. The investigation is ongoing. Digoxin toxicity, an overdose of heart medication. I searched our medicine cabinet through the bathroom camera footage from 2 weeks ago. Sarah, carefully removing a prescription bottle from her own collection of various vitamins and supplements. The label wasn't visible, but I knew what I was looking at. Sarah had been poisoning our elderly neighbor. Not enough to kill her, just enough to make her sick. Sick enough to need medical care. Sick enough for Sarah to play the role of concerned neighbor, devoted caretaker, the person who saved poor Margaret's life by getting her to the hospital in time. This was Munchausen by proxy. Not hurting herself, but hurting someone else to gain attention and sympathy as the caring person who helped them. Nurse Morrison hadn't been warning me about Sarah's self-injuries. She'd been warning me about Margaret. And she'd said 3 times at this hospital. Margaret was the 3rd victim. I spent the next 2 hours searching for information about the previous 2. It took some digging, cross-referencing news articles with dates and times from our security footage, but I found them. 4 months ago, Sarah had befriended an elderly man named Robert Shun, no relation to me despite the shared surname, who lived 3 blocks away. She'd met him at the community center where she occasionally taught free yoga classes for seniors. She'd visited him regularly, bringing him meals, keeping him company. He'd been hospitalized twice at St. Mary's for mysterious episodes of low blood sugar despite not being diabetic. Sarah had been with him both times, the concerned friend who found him unresponsive and called 911. The second time, Robert's daughter had grown suspicious and demanded a toxicology screen. They found insulin in his system. Robert didn't take insulin. Someone had been injecting him with it. The police had investigated briefly, but with no clear suspect and Robert refusing to believe anyone would hurt him, the case had gone nowhere. Robert had moved into an assisted living facility at his daughter's insistence, and that had been the end of it, until Sarah found a new victim. The first victim I could find evidence of was harder to trace, but I eventually connected the dots. 6 months ago, Sarah had volunteered at a nursing home in Tempe. She'd been assigned to spend time with residents who had no family visitors. One of those residents, an 82-year-old woman named Ethel Patterson, had experienced a sudden decline in health. Multiple falls, confusion, weakness. She'd been hospitalized 3 times in 2 months, always at St. Mary's because that's where the nursing home transferred patients. Ethel had died. The death certificate listed natural causes, complications from dementia and old age. But I found a note in the nursing home records, accessible through a disturbingly simple Google search of public complaints filed with the state, that mentioned concerns about medication administration during the time period when Ethel's health declined. Sarah had stopped volunteering there shortly after Ethel's death. Too traumatic, she'd told me. She couldn't handle watching the residents deteriorate. 3 victims, 3 vulnerable elderly people, 3 sets of mysterious medical crises that gave Sarah the opportunity to be the hero, the caretaker, the person everyone praised for her compassion. And now Margaret was in the hospital, and Sarah had a broken wrist that would give her an excuse to visit frequently, checking on her friend, who she'd driven to the ER, maintaining the role of devoted neighbor. It was 5:30 a.m. The sun would be rising soon. I'd been awake all night, and I had no idea what to do with the information I'd uncovered. My wife was a serial abuser, possibly a murderer, if Ethel Patterson's death had been hastened by whatever Sarah had done to her. And she was living in my house, sleeping in my bed, planning her next move. I thought about Nurse Morrison, about the risk she'd taken by warning me. She must have seen Sarah during one of Margaret's visits. Must have recognized a pattern from Robert's case, maybe even from Ethel's. Must have finally decided she couldn't stay silent anymore. I needed to talk to her, but I couldn't do it through official channels. If Sarah found out I was investigating, if she suspected I knew anything, she might run. Or worse, she might escalate. Hurt someone else. Hurt Margaret more severely. I heard movement from the bedroom. Sarah was awake. I quickly closed all my browser windows and pulled up a work document, making it look like I'd been up early reviewing security protocols for a client. The familiar routine of deception, except now I was the one hiding things. Sarah appeared in the doorway of my office, looking rumpled and tired, her purple cast awkward at her side. "Marcus? Did you sleep at all?" "Couldn't," I said, forcing a smile. "Had a work emergency. Client got hit with a ransomware attack overnight. I've been coordinating the response team." The lie came easily. Too easily. "You should get some rest," Sarah said, her voice soft with concern. "You'll make yourself sick." The irony was almost too much. My wife, who poisoned elderly people and broke her own bones for attention, was worried about my health. I promised. Just need to wrap up a few things. How's your wrist? Throbbing, she admitted, wincing. I need to take another pain pill. And Marcus, I was thinking I should visit Margaret today. Check on her. I feel terrible that I haven't been there since she went to the hospital. My blood went cold. Margaret, our neighbor. Didn't I tell you? I took her to the ER last week. She was so sick, poor thing. They admitted her for observation. I should bring her some flowers, maybe some magazines. She doesn't have anyone else. The casual way she said it. The perfect performance of care and concern. If I didn't know what I knew, I would have thought my wife was a saint. That's really thoughtful, I managed. But you should rest today. Your wrist. A broken wrist doesn't stop me from being a good neighbor, Sarah interrupted gently. Margaret needs someone. I'll go this afternoon. She was going back to the hospital, back to St. Mary's, back to her victim. I had maybe 8 hours to figure out how to stop her. After Sarah went back to bed, I made a decision. I had to contact Nurse Morrison, but I couldn't risk leaving a digital trail that Sarah might discover. No emails, no texts, no phone calls from my regular number. At 7 a.m., I drove to a convenience store 3 miles from our house and bought a prepaid phone with cash. I activated it in the parking lot, then called St. Mary's Hospital. St. Mary's Hospital. How may I direct your call? Emergency department, please. The line clicked and transferred. Another voice answered, ED nursing station. Hi, I need to speak with Rachel Morrison. She's a nurse there. It's urgent. One moment. A pause. I'm sorry. Rachel's not on duty until tonight. Her shift starts at 7 p.m. Can someone else help you? No. I need Rachel specifically. Can you give her a message? I can leave a note in her box. Please tell her Marcus Chin called. She gave me some advice yesterday, and I need to discuss it with her. It's about a patient's safety. Here's my number. I rattled off the prepaid phone's number. Please ask her to call me as soon as possible. Tell her it's about what she warned me about. She'll understand. I'll make sure she gets the message, Mr. Chun. I hung up and sat in my car, staring at the prepaid phone like it might explode. I'd just taken the first step toward exposing my wife. There was no going back now. The phone rang at 11:30 a.m. Unknown number. I answered immediately. Mr. Chun. Nurse Morrison's voice was cautious, professional. I got your message. I'm calling from my personal phone. What's going on? You were right, I said without preamble. About everything. I checked the cameras. Sarah broke her own wrist deliberately, and I found 2 other incidents where she hurt herself to get medical attention. I'm sorry, Rachel said quietly. I know that must have been. That's not why I'm calling. It's not about Sarah hurting herself. It's about Margaret Halverson. Silence on the line. Then, you know about Margaret? I know Sarah's been poisoning her. I have her on camera, adding something to Margaret's tea. I know Margaret was hospitalized for digoxin toxicity, and I know Sarah's planning to visit her at the hospital this afternoon. Jesus. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. Mr. Chun, we can't let that happen. If Sarah gets access to Margaret again. I know. That's why I'm calling. I need your help. I need to document everything, get evidence that will hold up legally, and I need to do it before Sarah visits Margaret today. I'm not on shift until 7 tonight, Rachel said, but I can come in early. Meet me in the hospital cafeteria at 3 p.m. Don't tell Sarah you're coming. Don't tell anyone. I'll be there. Mr. Chun, Marcus, what you're about to do is going to destroy your life as you know it. Are you sure you're ready for that? I thought about Margaret lying in a hospital bed, vulnerable and alone. I thought about Robert Chun, who'd been so confused by his mysterious illnesses. I thought about Ethel Patterson, who died. I'm sure, I said. At 2:45 p.m., I told Sarah I had to go into the office for a few hours to deal with the ransomware situation. She was disappointed I couldn't drive her to visit Margaret, but I promised I'd take her tomorrow instead. She agreed reluctantly, settling onto the couch with Pixel and her laptop, planning to do some work on her yoga class scheduling. I drove to St. Mary's Hospital, my heart pounding the entire way. This was real now. I was about to expose my wife as a criminal, a predator, someone who hurt vulnerable people for attention and sympathy. The hospital cafeteria was a typical institutional space. Fluorescent lights, plastic tables, the smell of overcooked vegetables and coffee. Rachel Morrison was waiting at a corner table, wearing civilian clothes, jeans, and a sweater, trying to look inconspicuous. I sat down across from her, and for a moment we just looked at each other. Two strangers brought together by the horror of what my wife had done. "Thank you for warning me," I said finally. "I almost didn't," Rachel admitted. "I could lose my job for this. Violation of patient privacy, making accusations without proof. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. Not after Margaret. "Tell me about the others," I said. "You mentioned Sarah's done this 3 times at St. Mary's. I found evidence of Robert Chun and Ethel Patterson." Rachel nodded slowly. "Ethel Patterson was the first one I noticed. I was working in the skilled nursing unit at the time, and I saw your wife visiting Ethel regularly. Sweet, attentive, always bringing little gifts. Then Ethel started declining rapidly. Falls, confusion, weakness. Every time she came to the ER, Sarah was there, the concerned volunteer who'd found her in distress." "Did you suspect Sarah then?" "Not at first, but something felt off. The timing was too convenient. And Sarah was always so eager to stay involved in Ethel's care, asking detailed questions about her treatment, her medications. It felt like more than normal concern." "What changed?" "Ethel died," Rachel said bluntly. "Natural causes, officially. But I requested a review of her medical records, and there were inconsistencies. Medication doses that didn't match what was prescribed. Signs of possible digoxin toxicity in her blood work from one visit that were never followed up on. By the time I raised concerns, Ethel was already gone, and there was no evidence to support an investigation." "So you started watching for patterns?" "Yes." 6 months later, Robertson showed up in our ER with insulin toxicity. And there was Sarah, the devoted friend who'd found him unresponsive and called 911. That's when I knew for certain. 2 elderly patients, similar symptoms, and Sarah always present as the hero. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Rachel's expression was pained. "With what evidence? A feeling? Suspicions?" Robert's daughter pushed for an investigation, but it went nowhere. No proof of who administered the insulin. No witnesses. And Robert himself refused to believe anyone would hurt him. The case closed, and I had nothing solid to take to authorities. And then Margaret, Rachel confirmed. When she came in with digoxin toxicity and Sarah was there again, playing the same role, I couldn't stay silent anymore. I looked up Sarah's husband, you, and took the risk of warning you. "Do you know how much trouble you could be in for that?" "I know exactly how much trouble," Rachel said. "But some things are more important than my nursing license. Like stopping someone who's systematically poisoning elderly people." I pulled out my phone and showed her clips from my security footage. Sarah adding something to Margaret's tea. Sarah carefully staging her own injuries. The systematic pattern of abuse and attention-seeking. Rachel watched in silence, her face growing paler with each clip. "This is beyond Munchausen," she whispered. "This is calculated predation. What do I do with this?" I asked. "How do I make sure she can't hurt anyone else?" "You need to go to the police. Not hospital security, not administration. Real police. Detective level. Show them everything you have. Will they believe me? She's my wife. They'll say I have a motive to lie, that we're in the middle of a divorce or something. That's why you need more than just your testimony," Rachel said. "You need medical records showing the pattern. You need my statement as a medical professional. And you need to catch her in the act." "Catch her how?" Rachel leaned forward. "Margaret is still in the hospital. She's stable but weak. If Sarah tries to visit her, we can document it. If she tries to access Margaret's medications or 4-line, we catch her on hospital security cameras. You want to use Margaret as bait. I want to protect Margaret while gathering the evidence needed to stop Sarah permanently," Rachel corrected. "Margaret's in a semi-private room, but we can move her to a single room with better camera coverage. We can have staff watching. The moment Sarah does anything suspicious, we intervene. It was dangerous. If something went wrong, Margaret could be hurt or worse. But if we didn't do anything, Sarah would find another victim eventually. And the next one might not survive." "When's Margaret's next visiting hours?" I asked. "Open visiting until 8 p.m. If Sarah comes today like you said she's planning, it'll be soon. I check my watch. 3:17 p.m. She might already be on her way. Rachel stood up quickly. I need to get Margaret moved and brief the charge nurse. Can you wait here? If you see Sarah arrive, text me immediately. She scribbled her number on a napkin. What do I do if she sees me? Make up an excuse. Say you had a client meeting in the building, but try to stay out of sight. She hurried away, leaving me alone in the cafeteria with a cold cup of coffee and the weight of what we were about to do. At 3:45 p.m., I saw Sarah walk through the hospital's main entrance. She was carrying a bouquet of sunflowers in a gift bag, her purple cast prominent against her navy blue dress. She looked beautiful, composed, every inch the caring friend bringing cheer to a sick neighbor. I texted Rachel. She's here. Main entrance. Heading toward elevators. The response was immediate. Margaret's in room 412. Fourth floor. We're watching. I followed at a distance, staying behind columns and groups of visitors, keeping Sarah in sight without being seen. She took the elevator to the fourth floor, and I took the stairs, arriving just in time to see her approach the nurse's station. Hi, I'm here to visit Margaret Halverson. I'm her neighbor, Sarah Chun. I drove her here last week when she got sick. The nurse at the desk, not Rachel, someone younger, checked her computer. Room 412. Down the hall, last door on the right. Thank you so much. I watched Sarah walk down the corridor, her heels clicking on the linoleum, the picture of innocent concern. She knocked on room 412's door, waited, then entered. I found an alcove with a view of the room's door and waited, my heart hammering. Rachel appeared beside me moments later, breathless. Hospital security is monitoring the room's camera feed, she whispered. We'll see everything she does. Margaret's awake and aware. We've briefed her that if anything feels wrong, she should press her call button immediately. Through the partially open door, I could hear Sarah's cheerful voice. Margaret, oh, I'm so glad to see you looking better. I brought you sunflowers. They're your favorite, right? Margaret's response was weak but warm. Sarah, we didn't have to. You've already done so much. Nonsense. You're my friend. I'll always be here for you. The perfect performance. If I didn't know what I knew, I would have been proud of my wife's compassion. Rachel and I watched the door, tension coiling tighter with each passing minute. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Nothing happened. Sarah sat with Margaret, chatting about neighborhood news, showing her magazines she'd brought, fluffing her pillows. Maybe she's not going to do anything, I whispered. Maybe with hospital staff around, she won't risk it. Or she's waiting for the right moment. Rachel murmured back. At the 20-minute mark, Sarah stood up. Let me get you some fresh water. Your pitcher looks empty. You're so thoughtful, Margaret said. Sarah picked up the plastic water pitcher from Margaret's bedside table and left the room, walking past our alcove toward the small kitchen area at the end of the hallway. Rachel and I exchanged glances. Follow her, Rachel said. I'll stay here in case she comes back a different way. I moved quickly, quietly, staying far enough behind that Sarah wouldn't hear me. The hallway kitchen was a small space with a sink, an ice machine, and cabinets for supplies. Sarah entered, set the pitcher on the counter, and looked around carefully. Then she reached into her purse. I pulled out my phone and started recording, zooming in as much as I could without losing focus. Sarah removed a small bottle from her purse. Even at this distance, I could see the label, digoxin, Margaret's heart medication. Sarah must have taken it during one of her earlier visits to Margaret's house. She opened the bottle, tilted several pills into her palm, then crushed them against the counter with the bottom of the water pitcher. The motion was practiced, efficient. She'd done this before. She swept the crushed pills into her palm, then held her hand over the pitcher as she filled it with water, letting the medication dissolve into the liquid. She was poisoning Margaret's water, right here in the hospital, in front of cameras. I kept recording as Sarah rinsed her hands, checked her reflection in the polished metal of the paper towel dispenser, and picked up the pitcher. She walked out of the kitchen with that same pleasant expression, the concerned friend bringing fresh water to a sick neighbor. I let her pass, then immediately texted Rachel. She did it. Added crushed digoxin to Margaret's water. I have video. Rachel's response. Don't let her give it to Margaret. We need to catch her in the act, but stop her before Margaret drinks it. I'm getting security now. This was it. The moment we'd been waiting for. The evidence that would prove Sarah was poisoning Margaret. I walked quickly back toward room 412, where Sarah was entering with a water pitcher and that same sweet smile. Here we go, Margaret. Fresh and cold. Sarah. I stepped into the doorway. What are you doing here? She turned, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Surprise. Calculation. Then the mask snapped back into place. Marcus. What you? Did your work meeting end early? Meeting? I play confused. I've been here for an hour, visiting a different client on the 3rd floor. I walked into the room, positioning myself between Sarah and Margaret's bed. I didn't know you were coming to see Margaret today. I mentioned it this morning, Sarah said, her tone slightly defensive. I told you I wanted to check on her. Right, of course. I looked at Margaret, who was watching our interaction with confused concern. Hi, Mrs. Halverson. How are you feeling? Better, thank you, Margaret said weakly. Your wife has been so kind to me. She certainly has. I turned back to Sarah, noting how tightly she was gripping the water pitcher. Actually, Sarah, can I talk to you in the hallway for a minute? It's about something at home. Can it wait? I'm visiting with Margaret. It's important, I insisted, my voice firm. Just for a minute. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. She knew something was wrong. She could sense it, but she couldn't refuse without arousing suspicion. Of course. She set the water pitcher on Margaret's bedside table, too far for Margaret to reach easily, and followed me into the hallway. The moment we were outside the room, Rachel appeared with 2 security guards and a man in a dark suit who I assumed was hospital security management. Mrs. Chun, the man said formally. I'm Thomas Reeves, Director of Hospital Security. We need to speak with you about an incident involving patient safety. Sarah's face went pale. I don't understand. What incident? You were observed tampering with a patient's drinking water in the 4th floor kitchen approximately 5 minutes ago. We have the interaction on security footage. That's ridiculous. I was just filling Margaret's pitcher with crushed digoxin dissolved in the water, I said quietly. Sarah's eyes snapped to me, and in that moment, the mask completely fell away. What I saw underneath was rage. Pure cold fury. You've been spying on me, she hissed. I've been protecting innocent people from you, I corrected. Thomas Reeves gestured to the security guards. Mrs. Chun, we need you to come with us while we sort this out. Phoenix police are on their way. This is insane. Marcus, tell them this is a mistake. It's not a mistake, Sarah. I know everything. I know about Margaret, about Robert Chun, about Ethel Patterson. I know you've been poisoning elderly people for months. And I know you've been breaking your own bones for attention. I have proof of all of it. Her face went through a series of expressions: shock, denial, calculation, then finally something that looked almost like relief. You have no idea what it's like, she said softly. And for the first time since I'd known her, she sounded completely genuine. Being invisible. Being nothing. Do you know what it feels like to need someone to see you so badly that you do anything for that moment when they look at you with concern and care? When they tell you you're important? So you hurt people. I gave them purpose, Sarah said. And she actually seemed to believe it. Margaret was lonely. Robert was forgotten by his family. Ethel was dying anyway. I made their lives matter. I made them important. And yes, I got something out of it too. That's how relationships work, Marcus. Everyone gets something. The security guards took her arms, and she didn't resist. As they led her toward the elevator, she looked back at me one last time. You're going to regret this, she said. When you're alone in that empty house with no one to care about you, you're going to wish you'd just let me be who I needed to be. Then she was gone, and I was left standing in the hallway with Rachel and Thomas Reeves, trying to process what had just happened. Mr. Chun, Reeves said gently, the police will need your statement and your video evidence. I have everything, I said numbly. Security footage, recordings, documentation of all 3 victims. It's all backed up in multiple locations. You did the right thing, Rachel said, touching my arm gently. You saved Margaret's life today. Maybe other people's lives too. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like I just watched my entire life implode. The investigation moved quickly once the Phoenix Police Department's Major Crimes Unit got involved. Detective Linda Vasquez took my statement in a windowless interview room at the hospital while technicians secured the poisoned water pitcher as evidence. I showed her everything. The security footage from our home showing Sarah deliberately breaking her own wrist, crushing her hand with a skillet, hammering her own shin. The recordings of her adding substances to Margaret's tea. The timeline I'd built showing her proximity to all three victims during their medical crises. This is extraordinary documentation, Mr. Chun, Detective Vasquez said, scrolling through the files on my laptop. How long have you had security cameras in your home? 6 months. I work in cybersecurity, so I may be more paranoid than most people about home security. I never thought I'd need them to protect people from my wife. And you only discovered this pattern yesterday? Yes. Nurse Morrison warned me to check my cameras. Without her, I never would have known. Detective Vasquez made notes. Nurse Morrison violated several patient privacy laws by contacting you. She could face professional discipline. She saved Margaret Halverson's life, I said firmly. If she hadn't warned me, Sarah would have poisoned Margaret today, and we'd all be wondering why the poor woman's heart gave out. I'm not saying she was wrong, Mr. Chun. I'm saying there will be consequences. Sometimes doing the right thing costs us. The truth of that statement settled over me like a weight. Rachel would likely lose her nursing license. I was about to lose my wife, my marriage, my understanding of the past 12 years of my life. Sarah would lose her freedom. Everyone was losing something. What happens now? I asked. We've arrested your wife on charges of attempted poisoning and assault with intent to harm. Based on your evidence, we'll be expanding the investigation to include Robert Chen's case and reopening the inquiry into Ethel Patterson's death. If we can prove a pattern of systematic abuse, we're looking at multiple felony counts. How long will she be in jail? Given the severity and the flight risk, bail will be set high. She'll likely remain in custody through the trial unless someone posts a substantial bond. I thought about our joint bank accounts, our house, our shared assets. Sarah would expect me to help her, to post bail, to stand by her because that's what spouses do. I won't be posting bail, I said clearly. I need Detective Vasquez to understand that. Whatever happens legally, I'm not helping her get out of jail. Detective Vasquez nodded. That's your choice. Though I should warn you, your wife will likely try to contact you. From jail, through lawyers, through mutual friends. Are you prepared for that? No, I admitted, but I'll deal with it anyway. The interview lasted 3 hours. By the time I left the hospital, it was after 9 p.m., and I was exhausted in ways I'd never experienced. Not physical tiredness, but a soul-deep weariness that came from having your reality completely inverted. I drove home on autopilot, barely noticing the familiar streets of Scottsdale. When I pulled into our garage, the same garage where Sarah had broken her own wrist, I sat in my car for a long time, unable to make myself go inside. Our house, which had always felt like a sanctuary, now felt contaminated. Sarah had lived here, planned here, staged her injuries here. Every room held evidence of her deception. Finally, I forced myself out of the car and into the house. Pixel and Bite greeted me frantically, confused by the disruption to their routine. I fed them, let them out, went through the motions of pet care while my mind spun in circles. My phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Again, I ignored it. On the third call, I answered. Mr. Chun, this is Jennifer Carrington from Carrington and Associates. I'm an attorney, and I've been retained by your wife to represent her in this matter. That was fast. Mrs. Chun is entitled to legal representation, Mr. Chun. I'm calling to inform you that she would like to speak with you. She's requesting that you visit her in custody. No. Mr. Chun, I understand this is an emotional situation, but your wife is asking for your support during. My wife, I interrupted, spent months poisoning elderly people and breaking her own bones for attention. She tried to kill our neighbor today. I'm not visiting her in jail. I'm not posting bail. And I'm not offering support. Is there anything else? A pause. We'll be filing for access to your home security recordings as part of our defense. Your surveillance of Mrs. Chun may constitute an invasion of privacy. The cameras were installed in my home with both our knowledge and consent, I said. Sarah knew they were there. She just forgot they were working again when she decided to stage her accidents. But my lawyer will address any motions you file. Don't call this number again. I hung up and immediately blocked the number. Then I called Kate Sullivan, the attorney who'd helped me prepare my evidence for the police. Kate, Sarah's lawyer just called. She's going to try to suppress the security footage. Expected, Kate said calmly. Don't worry. The recordings were made in your own home where you had every right to surveillance. And even if there were privacy concerns, the evidence of attempted poisoning would likely be admitted anyway under public safety exceptions. What I need to do? Nothing tonight. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll start the process of protecting your assets and filing for divorce. I assume you want to proceed with dissolution of marriage. Yes. Marcus, Kate said gently, I need you to prepare yourself. This is going to get ugly. Sarah's defense will likely try to paint you as controlling, abusive, paranoid. They'll say you installed cameras to spy on her, that you're manufacturing evidence for a vindictive divorce. Are you ready for that? I have evidence, Kate. Video evidence of everything. Evidence can be contested. Your credibility can be attacked. This won't be as simple as showing videos and having everyone believe you. This is going to be a fight. After I hung up with Kate, I stood in my living room and looked around at the life I'd built. The furniture we'd chosen together. The artwork Sarah had picked out. The photos on the wall showing us smiling at our wedding, on vacation, at friends' parties. All of it was a lie. Or at least I no longer knew what was real and what was performance. I walked through the house, room by room, seeing it differently now. The kitchen where Sarah had crushed her hand with a skillet. The garage where she'd broken her wrist. The bedroom where she'd slept beside me while planning to poison our neighbor. In the bedroom, I found her journal in her nightstand drawer. I'd never read it before. Privacy, trust, respect. All those things that turn out to mean nothing. I opened it to the most recent entry, dated 2 days ago. Margaret's responding well to the increased doses. She trusts me completely now. When I visit her in the hospital, the nurses all comment on what a good friend I am. Dr. Holloway specifically praised me for my dedication. That moment when she said, Margaret is lucky to have you. That feeling is what I live for. Being seen, being appreciated, being essential. Marcus noticed I seemed happier lately. He thinks it's because I'm enjoying my yoga teaching more. He has no idea that his surveillance system has been offline for weeks, that I'm invisible in our own home. He looks at me and sees what he expects to see. His wife, stable and predictable. Tomorrow I'll stage the wrist injury. The pain will be intense, but worth it. Marcus will rush to the hospital, worried and concerned. He'll take care of me for a few days, and I'll feel important to him again. And I'll have the perfect excuse to visit Margaret more frequently while recovering. Everyone wins. I read the entry 3 times, trying to understand the psychology behind it. The need for attention was so desperate, so consuming, that Sarah had built her entire life around manufacturing crises that would make people care about her. And I'd been completely blind to it. The next few days blurred together in a haze of legal consultations, police interviews, and media attention. Once word leaked that a local yoga instructor had been arrested for poisoning elderly neighbors, the story exploded across Phoenix news outlets. Yoga instructor accused of serial elder abuse. Scottsdale woman charged with poisoning 3 elderly victims. Husband security cameras catch wife in shocking crime. Reporters camped outside our house. My phone rang constantly with interview requests. Sarah's yoga studio issued a statement canceling her classes and expressing shock at the allegations. Former students went on social media claiming they'd always known something was off about Sarah, though none of them had said anything at the time. Robert Chin's daughter called me personally. Mr. Chun, I don't know how to thank you. When my father was sick, everyone thought I was paranoid for suspecting foul play. Now we finally have answers. Margaret Halverson was released from the hospital after a week of careful monitoring. She called me from her daughter's house in Seattle, where she'd gone to recover. Marcus, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Sarah seemed so kind, so concerned. I trusted her completely. It's not your fault, Margaret. She's very good at deception. Will you be okay? I know this must be devastating for you. The question caught me off guard. Everyone was asking about the victims, about the investigation, about Sarah's mental state. No one had asked about me. I don't know, I admitted. Right now, I'm just trying to get through each day. The toxicology reports came back confirming what we already knew. Margaret's water pitcher contained enough digoxin to potentially trigger a fatal cardiac event. If she'd drunk even half the pitcher, she likely would have died within hours. Ethel Patterson's case was reopened. Her body was exhumed. An additional toxicology testing revealed evidence of chronic digoxin poisoning in her tissue samples. The original death certificate had listed complications from dementia, but the new evidence showed she'd been systematically poisoned over a period of weeks. Sarah was charged with second-degree murder in Ethel's death. The prosecutor's office held a press conference announcing that they were seeking maximum sentences on all counts. I watched the press conference from my office at home, my 2 dogs pressed against my legs for comfort. On screen, Detective Vasquez was explaining the timeline of Sarah's crimes to a room full of reporters. This defendant engaged in a pattern of systematic abuse, targeting our community's most vulnerable members. Elderly people who were isolated, lonely, and trusting. She exploited their vulnerability for her own psychological gratification, causing suffering and, in at least one case, death. This is not a crime of passion or desperation. This is calculated predation. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You destroyed everything. I hope you're satisfied. S. She found a way to contact me from jail. I blocked the number immediately, but the message stayed with me. You destroyed everything. No, I thought. You destroyed everything. I just documented it. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after Sarah's arrest. I attended, sitting in the gallery while lawyers argued about evidence and procedure. Sarah was led into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, her wrists shackled, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without her carefully constructed persona. When she saw me, she smiled. Not a genuine smile, but something calculating. A reminder that she still thought she could manipulate me, that our years together meant I'd eventually come around to her side. I looked away. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Sarah's defense attorney, Jennifer Carrington, argued that the security footage should be suppressed, that I had violated Sarah's privacy by recording her without specific consent, that the evidence was circumstantial. The prosecutor, Michael Torres, countered with the poisoned water pitcher, the toxicology reports, the pattern of 3 separate victims, and the clear documentation of Sarah staging her own injuries. The judge, a stern woman named Beatrice Warren, reviewed everything carefully before making her ruling. The evidence presented by the state is substantial and credible. The defendant's privacy expectations in the marital home do not outweigh the public interest in prosecuting serious felonies. The security footage will be admitted. As for the charges themselves, I find sufficient probable cause to bind this case over for trial. The defendant will remain in custody. Bail is set at $2 million. $2 million. Sarah would never make bail. She'd stay in jail until the trial. Outside the courthouse, I was ambushed by reporters. Microphones and cameras surrounded me before I could reach my car. Mr. Chun, how does it feel to be responsible for your wife's arrest? Did you suspect she was poisoning people? Are you filing for divorce? Do you think your wife is mentally ill? I stopped walking and faced the cameras. Kate had advised me not to speak to press, but I needed to say something. One statement, then I'd be done. My wife committed serious crimes against vulnerable people who trusted her. I did what any decent person would do. I reported her to the authorities and provided evidence. The real heroes in this story are Nurse Rachel Morrison, who risked her career to warn me, and the elderly victims who survived. That's all I have to say. I pushed through the crowd and got into my car, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The trial was set for 4 months later. In the meantime, I had to figure out how to rebuild my life from the wreckage. I filed for divorce. Sarah contested it, claiming abandonment and requesting spousal support. Her argument, essentially, was that I destroyed her life and therefore owed her financial compensation. The judge denied her requests. Hard to claim abandonment when you're in jail for attempted murder. I closed our joint bank accounts, changed the locks on the house, and began the process of separating our shared assets. Everything felt tainted now. The house we'd bought together, the furniture we'd chosen, the life we'd built, all of it contaminated by Sarah's deception. I put the house on the market. Too many memories, too much darkness soaked into the walls. I couldn't live there anymore. Within a week, I had 3 offers. I accepted the highest one and began packing up 12 years of marriage in boxes marked donate, keep, and trash. Most of Sarah's belongings went into the trash pile. Rachel Morrison reached out to me 6 weeks after Sarah's arrest. We met for coffee at a neutral location, a Starbucks far from the hospital in my neighborhood. They suspended my nursing license, she told me, stirring her coffee without drinking it. 6 months, pending a review by the Board of Nursing. They said I violated patient privacy laws by warning you about Margaret. I'm sorry, I said, feeling the weight of her sacrifice. If there's anything I can do, you can testify at my board hearing, Rachel interrupted. Tell them that my warning saved Margaret's life. That without it, Sarah would still be operating freely, finding new victims. Tell them I did the right thing, even if it wasn't the legal thing. Of course, absolutely. I don't regret it, Rachel said, finally meeting my eyes. I'd do it again, but it's hard. I've been a nurse for 12 years. It's my identity, and now I'm suspended, probably going to be fined, maybe lose my license entirely. The trial is in 3 months, I said. Once Sarah's convicted, once the full scope of her crimes is public record, people will understand why you did what you did. Maybe. Rachel didn't sound convinced. Or maybe I'll just be the nurse who broke confidentiality laws. People remember the rule breaking, not the context. We sat in silence for a moment. 2 people whose lives have been upended by Sarah's pathology. Can I ask you something? Rachel said finally. Did you have any idea? Any hint that your wife was capable of this? I thought about all the times Sarah had been loving and supportive. The time she'd taken care of me when I was sick, celebrated my work achievements, made plans for our future. Had any of that been real? No, I admitted. I thought I knew her. I thought we had a good marriage. Strong communication, shared goals, genuine affection. Looking back now, I can see patterns I missed. The way she'd get upset if I didn't pay enough attention to her. The elaborate stories she'd tell about her day that always position her as the hero. The constant need for validation. But I just thought that was normal relationship stuff. I never imagined. I stopped, unable to finish the thought. I don't think you could have known, Rachel said gently. People like Sarah are extraordinarily good at hiding their true nature. That's what makes them dangerous. The trial began on a cold morning in January, 4 months after Sarah's arrest. The courthouse was packed with media, curious observers, and advocates for elder abuse awareness. I sat in the gallery with Kate Sullivan on one side and Detective Vasquez on the other. Sarah was led into the courtroom in business casual clothing. Her defense attorney had arranged for her to wear regular clothes rather than jail jumpsuits for the trial, trying to make her look more sympathetic. Her hair was styled, her makeup subtle. She looked like the Sarah I'd married. And for a moment, my heart twisted with something that might have been grief. Then I remembered Ethel Patterson, dead because Sarah wanted attention. I remembered Margaret, nearly killed by poisoned water. I remembered Robert Shunn, terrified and confused by his mysterious illnesses. And the sympathy evaporated. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They called medical experts who explained Munchausen syndrome and Munchausen by proxy. They presented the security footage from my home, showing Sarah deliberately breaking her own wrist in clear, horrible detail. They showed the hospital footage of Sarah crushing digoxin pills and adding them to Margaret's water pitcher. Margaret Halverson testified via video link from Seattle, too traumatized to return to Arizona. She described Sarah's friendship, her kindness, her constant presence during Margaret's medical crises. She was always there when I needed help, Margaret said, her voice shaking. I trusted her completely. I thought she was saving my life. I never knew she was the one making me sick. Robert Chin's daughter testified about her father's mysterious illnesses and her suspicions that something wasn't right. She broke down on the stand, describing how the police hadn't believed her, how Robert had defended Sarah even as his health deteriorated. The defense's strategy was to paint Sarah as mentally ill and not responsible for her actions. They brought in a psychiatrist who diagnosed her with severe Munchausen syndrome with psychotic features, claiming she genuinely believed she was helping her victims. Mrs. Chin's actions, while tragic, stem from a profound psychological disorder, the defense psychiatrist testified. She didn't intend to cause harm. She was seeking connection and care in the only way her damaged psyche knew how. During cross-examination, Prosecutor Torres destroyed this narrative. Doctor, you claim Mrs. Chun didn't intend harm, but she researched the lethal doses of digoxin. She carefully calculated how much poison to administer to keep her victims sick but not dead, at least not immediately. She staged elaborate deceptions to cover her tracks. Does that sound like someone who didn't understand what she was doing? The psychiatrist hesitated. Well, she understood the mechanics, but she understood exactly what she was doing, didn't she? She chose vulnerable victims. She isolated them. She gained their trust. She poisoned them. And she enjoyed the attention she received when people praised her for being such a devoted caretaker. That's not mental illness, doctor. That's malice. The prosecution's closing argument was powerful. Torres stood before the jury, his voice steady and clear. Sarah Chun is not a victim of mental illness. She's a predator who weaponized the appearance of compassion. She looked at elderly people who were lonely, isolated, vulnerable, and she saw opportunities. Opportunities to hurt them for her own gratification. Ethel Patterson died because Sarah Chun wanted to feel important. Margaret Halverson nearly died for the same reason. Robert Chun was terrorized and traumatized. And let's not forget that Sarah also deliberately broke her own bones multiple times, staging accidents to manipulate her husband and medical professionals. This is a woman who understands right from wrong, who plans carefully, who covers her tracks. This is a woman who deserves to be held fully accountable for the suffering she's caused. The defense's closing argument tried to evoke sympathy. Sarah Chun is sick, Jennifer Carrington told the jury. She suffers from a recognized psychiatric disorder that compelled her to seek attention and care in destructive ways. She needs treatment, not punishment. She needs compassion, not condemnation. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Ethel Patterson. Guilty of attempted murder of Margaret Halverson. Guilty of assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm against Robert Chun. Guilty of multiple counts of insurance fraud related to her staged injuries. Sarah's face remained blank as the verdicts were read. She didn't cry, didn't react, didn't show any emotion at all. It was like watching a mannequin receive a life sentence. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, victim impact statements were collected. Robert Chin's daughter wrote, "Sarah Chun destroyed my father's final years. He spent months thinking he was dying of a mysterious illness, terrified and confused. Even after we discovered what she'd done, he couldn't accept that someone he'd trusted had deliberately hurt him. He died 6 months ago, and his last words to me were asking if Sarah was okay in jail. She poisoned his body and his mind. He never recovered from the betrayal." Margaret Halverson wrote, "I am 73 years old, and I no longer trust anyone. Sarah Chun came into my life during my loneliest time, and she used that loneliness as a weapon against me. She made me sick while pretending to care for me. I moved across the country to live with my daughter because I'm too afraid to live alone anymore. Sarah didn't just poison my body, she poisoned my ability to trust the goodness in people." I was asked to submit a statement as well, though I wasn't technically a victim in the legal sense. I spent 3 days writing and rewriting it before settling on the truth. Sarah Chun was my wife for 12 years. I loved her. I trusted her. I built a life with her. But the woman I loved never really existed. She was a performance, a carefully crafted persona designed to hide the predator underneath. I grieve for the marriage I thought I had, For the future I thought we'd build together, for the person I thought she was. But mostly I grieve for the people she hurt, the elderly victims who trusted her, the medical professionals she manipulated, the community members who believed in her kindness. Sarah Chun taught me that love, without truth, is just another form of deception. And she taught me that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we know the least. The sentencing hearing was brief and brutal. Judge Warren had clearly prepared her statement carefully, and she delivered it with cold precision. Mrs. Chun, I've reviewed the pre-sentence report, the victim impact statements, and the psychological evaluations submitted by both the prosecution and defense. I've considered your lack of prior criminal history and the arguments made regarding your mental health. However, I find that your actions demonstrate a level of premeditation and cruelty that cannot be excused by any psychiatric diagnosis. You deliberately targeted vulnerable elderly individuals. You gained their trust and exploited their isolation. You caused immeasurable suffering for your own gratification. And most damningly, you show no genuine remorse. In the case of Ethel Patterson's murder, I sentence you to 25 years to life in state prison. For the attempted murder of Margaret Halverson, I sentence you to 15 years to run consecutively. For the assault on Robert Chun and the fraud charges, I sentence you to an additional 10 years, also consecutive. You will serve a minimum of 50 years before being eligible for parole. Given your age, this is effectively a life sentence. You will spend the rest of your life in prison, Mrs. Chun, where you will no longer have access to vulnerable victims. 50 years. Sarah was 38 years old. She'd be 88 before she could even apply for parole. As the bailiffs led her out of the courtroom, Sarah finally showed emotion. She turned and looked directly at me, and her expression was pure hatred. "This is your fault," she screamed. "I needed you, and you destroyed me. I hope you suffer for the rest of your life." The bailiffs pulled her through the door, and she was gone. In the hallway outside the courtroom, I was surrounded by supporters: Detective Vasquez, Kate Sullivan, Rachel Morrison, even Margaret Halverson's daughter, who'd flown in from Seattle for the sentencing. "It's over," Detective Vasquez said, shaking my hand. "You did it, Marcus. You stopped her." But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of something that should never have begun. 6 months after the trial, I'd rebuilt my life into something almost normal. I'd sold the house in Scottsdale and bought a smaller place in Tempe, closer to work. I'd adopted a third dog, a rescue named Justice who'd been found abandoned and scared. Pixel, Bite, and Justice formed a pack that kept me company through the lonely evenings. Work had become my refuge. I threw myself into cybersecurity projects, helping clients protect their networks and data. There was something satisfying about building walls that kept threats out, about identifying vulnerabilities before they could be exploited. Rachel Morrison's nursing license was reinstated after I testified at her board hearing, explaining how her warning had saved Margaret's life and potentially stopped Sarah from finding additional victims. The board issued a formal reprimand but allowed her to return to work. She sent me a thank you card. "Because of you, I get to keep helping people. Thank you for standing up for what was right, even when it cost you everything." Rachel. I framed that card and hung it in my home office, a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing means losing everything you thought you wanted. The media attention eventually died down. Yoga instructor Poisoner became old news, replaced by newer scandals and tragedies. Occasionally, I'd see references to the case in articles about Munchausen by proxy or elder abuse, but mostly life moved on. I started dating again, though it was difficult. How do you trust someone when the person you trusted most turned out to be a predator? How do you believe in love when your marriage was built on lies? My therapist, Dr. Patricia Keene, worked with me on rebuilding my ability to trust. "Not everyone is like Sarah," she reminded me in session after session. "What she did to you doesn't define what all relationships are. You can learn to trust again. It just takes time." 1 year after Sarah's sentencing, I received a letter from her in prison. The return address made my stomach turn, but curiosity won out over caution. I opened it. The handwriting was Sarah's, neat and controlled. "Marcus, I've had a lot of time to think in here. A lot of time to reflect on what happened and why. The prison psychiatrist says I have a personality disorder, that I was seeking validation in destructive ways, that I need to accept responsibility for my actions. But here's what I've realized. I'm not sorry for what I did. I'm sorry I got caught. I'm sorry you betrayed me. But I'm not sorry for making those old people feel important in their final years. They were dying anyway. I just gave them purpose. And you threw away 12 years of marriage because you couldn't understand what I needed. You could have helped me. Instead, you destroyed me. I'll be in here for the rest of my life because you couldn't keep my secrets. I hope that weighs on your conscience. I hope you think about me every day and wonder if you made the right choice. Because I think about you every day, and I'll never forgive you. Sarah, I read the letter twice, then fed it through my shredder. No remorse. No genuine understanding of the pain she'd caused. Just anger being caught and punished. Dr. Keene was right. Some people couldn't be saved or rehabilitated. Some people were fundamentally broken in ways that couldn't be fixed. Sarah was one of them. 2 years after the trial, I was sitting in my backyard with my 3 dogs, watching the Arizona sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize, but with a Phoenix area code. Mr. Chun? This is Dr. James Whitmore from the Phoenix Psychology Institute. I'm conducting research on Munchausen syndrome and Munchausen by proxy, and I was hoping I could interview you about your experience with your former wife. What kind of interview? Academic research. I'm writing a book about the warning signs of these disorders that family members and medical professionals often miss. Your case is one of the best documented examples I've encountered. Your security footage and timeline could help identify patterns that might prevent future tragedies. I thought about Ethel Patterson, who died alone and confused. About Robert Chun, who'd spent his final years doubting reality. About Margaret Halverson, who'd lost her ability to trust. I'll do it, I said. If it helps stop someone else from getting hurt, I'll tell you everything. The interview took place over several sessions. Dr. Whitmore was thorough, asking about Sarah's childhood, our relationship dynamics, the subtle signs I'd missed, the way she manipulated medical professionals and vulnerable victims. What you're describing, he said during our 3rd session, is someone with extremely high emotional intelligence used for malicious purposes. She understood people's vulnerabilities and exploited them expertly. That's what made her so dangerous. Could I have stopped her earlier? If I'd paid more attention, if I'd questioned things more. Mr. Chun, people like your ex-wife are extraordinarily skilled at deception. They spent their entire lives perfecting the art of appearing normal, even admirable. The fact that you eventually caught on and stopped her puts you ahead of most people in your situation. Many families never discover the truth. The book, Hidden Harm, Recognizing Munchausen Syndrome in Loved Ones, was published 18 months later. An entire chapter was devoted to Sarah's case, with my permission, but with identifying details changed to protect my privacy. The chapter's title was The Invisible Predator, When Compassion is a Disguise. Dr. Whitmore sent me an advance copy with a note. Your willingness to share your story will save lives. Thank you for your courage. I read the chapter once, then put the book on my shelf next to Rachel's thank you card. Reminders of the worst period of my life, but also reminders that something good had come from the horror. 3 years after Sarah's conviction, I met someone. Her name was Diana, and she was a social worker who specialized in elder care. We met at a community fundraiser for elder abuse prevention, an event I'd started attending as a volunteer speaker, sharing my story to raise awareness. Diana approached me after my presentation. That was incredibly brave, she said. Most people wouldn't have the courage to expose a spouse's crimes, especially with so much public scrutiny. I didn't have a choice, I replied. People were being hurt. You always have a choice. You chose to protect vulnerable people over protecting your marriage. That takes real character. We started dating slowly, carefully. I was upfront about my history, about Sarah, about my trust issues. Diana was patient, understanding, never pushing me beyond what I was ready for. I work with elder abuse cases regularly, she told me on our 5th date. I know exactly what kind of predator your ex-wife was, and I know exactly why you did what you did. You don't have to keep explaining yourself to me. 6 months into our relationship, I took Diana to meet Margaret Halverson, who'd moved back to Arizona after extensive therapy helped her rebuild her sense of safety. Margaret was living in a senior community with 24-hour security and regular wellness checks. "Marcus," Margaret said when she saw me, her face lighting up, "and you must be Diana. Marcus told me about you." We had lunch together, and I watched Margaret laugh and tell stories about her grandchildren. She was still cautious, still bore the scars of Sarah's betrayal, but she was healing. "You saved my life," Margaret said as we were leaving. "I don't think I ever properly thanked you for that." "You don't have to thank me," I said. "I'm just glad you're okay." "I'm more than okay," Margaret corrected. "I'm here. I'm alive. I get to watch my grandchildren grow up. That's everything." On the drive home, Diana took my hand. "You did something extraordinary, Marcus. You need to accept that. I just did what anyone would do." "No," she said firmly. "Most people would have looked away. Most people would have made excuses or convinced themselves they were imagining things. You looked directly at the horror, documented it, and stopped it. That's not what everyone would do. That's what heroes do." I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a man who'd been married to a monster and hadn't noticed until it was almost too late. But maybe Diana was right. Maybe the act of facing the truth and taking action was itself a form of heroism. 4 years after Sarah's conviction, I received notification that she was requesting a parole hearing. It was absurdly premature. She'd only served 4 years of a 50-year minimum sentence, but apparently she had the right to request a hearing regardless of her eligibility. The parole board hearing was scheduled for 6 months later. I was invited to submit a victim impact statement and to appear in person if I chose. Diana offered to come with me. "You don't have to face her alone." "I do," I said. "This is something I need to do by myself, to show her that she didn't break me, that I'm still here, still standing, still strong." The hearing took place in a sterile conference room at the Arizona State Prison Complex. Sarah was led in wearing prison blues, her hair now showing streaks of gray, her face harder than I remembered. She looked at me with that same expression of calculated assessment she'd worn throughout the trial. The parole board consisted of 5 members who reviewed Sarah's prison record, her psychological evaluations, and her behavior over the past 4 years. "Mrs. Chun," the board chair began, "you're not eligible for parole for another 46 years. Why are you requesting this hearing?" "Because I believe I've been rehabilitated," Sarah said, her voice calm and measured. "I've completed extensive therapy. I've taken responsibility for my actions. I understand now that I was sick, that I hurt people, that I need to make amends." "You've taken responsibility?" The chair looked skeptical. "Your prison psychiatric evaluations note that you consistently minimize your actions and blame others for your situation." "I was in denial initially," Sarah admitted smoothly. "But I've worked through that. I know now that I hurt people. I know that Ethel Patterson died because of me. I know that Margaret Halverson and Robert Chin suffered because of my need for attention. I'm deeply sorry for that. The performance was flawless. If I didn't know her, I might have believed it." "Mr. Chun," the chair said, turning to me, "you submitted a statement, but you're here in person as well. Would you like to address the board?" I stood up, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "Sarah, Chun hasn't changed. She's learned to say what she thinks you want to hear, but she's the same predator she was 4 years ago. I know this because 3 months ago, she sent a letter to Margaret Halverson's daughter, trying to convince her that I had manipulated the evidence, that she was innocent, that everyone had misunderstood what happened." Sarah's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Surprised that I knew about the letter. Mrs. Halverson's daughter immediately forwarded the letter to Detective Vasquez. I continued. "It's been added to Sarah's prison file. That letter wasn't an attempt at rehabilitation or making amends. It was an attempt to manipulate and gaslight a victim's family member. That's who Sarah Chun is. She's a predator who will say and do anything to get what she wants." I pulled out a copy of the letter and handed it to the board chair. "This was written 6 weeks ago. You can see for yourselves." The board members read the letter, their expressions growing increasingly stern. Sarah's carefully constructed facade was cracking. "Mrs. Chun," the chair said coldly, This letter directly contradicts your claims of rehabilitation and remorse. You're attempting to manipulate a victim's family, even from prison. This hearing is concluded. Your parole request is denied. Given this evidence of ongoing manipulative behavior, the board recommends you be denied further parole hearings for a minimum of 10 years. You are dismissed. As Sarah was let out, she looked at me one last time. The mask had completely fallen away now. What I saw was pure, undiluted rage. "I'll get out eventually," she hissed as the guards pulled her toward the door. "And when I do, you'll wish you'd never crossed me. In 50 years, you'll be 88 years old," I said calmly. "I'll be 86, and I'll still be free while you're still in prison. That's justice, Sarah. That's what happens to predators who hurt innocent people." The door closed behind her, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 4 years: closure. Diana was waiting in the parking lot. "How did it go?" "It's done," I said. "Really done this time. She won't be getting out for a very long time, and when she does, I'll be an old man who's lived a full life while she rotted in a cell." "That's dark, Marcus. That's reality. She destroyed lives for attention. Now she gets to spend the rest of her life getting attention from prison guards and psychiatrists. Seems fitting." We drove home in comfortable silence, and for the first time since that night in the hospital when Nurse Morrison had slipped me that note, I felt like I could truly move forward. 5 years after Sarah's conviction, I stood in front of a conference room full of hospital administrators, nurses, and social workers, sharing my story as part of a professional development seminar on recognizing elder abuse. The signs were always there, I told them, but they were buried under the appearance of compassion and care. Sarah looked like the perfect neighbor, the devoted volunteer, the concerned friend. That's what made her so dangerous. She weaponized kindness. After my presentation, a young nurse approached me. "Mr. Chun, I think I might be seeing a similar pattern with one of our regular ER patients. A woman who keeps bringing in her elderly father with mysterious symptoms. She's always so concerned, always asking detailed questions about his treatment, always positioning herself as his primary caregiver. But something feels off. Trust that feeling," I said immediately. "Document everything. Look for patterns. Check his medical history at other facilities. And if you see clear evidence of abuse, don't hesitate to report it, even if it means violating protocol." Nurse Morrison saved Margaret Halverson's life by warning me. She lost her license temporarily, but she saved a life. Sometimes rules need to be broken to prevent greater harm. The nurse nodded, making notes. "Thank you. I needed to hear that. One more thing," I added. "Be prepared for the consequences. Exposing someone like Sarah doesn't just affect the abuser. It affects everyone around them. Family members will be devastated. The community will be shocked. Your own life will change in ways you can't predict. But if you know someone is being hurt, you have to act." She thanked me and walked away, and I hoped she'd have the courage to do what was necessary if her suspicions proved correct. That evening, I proposed to Diana. We were having dinner at the same restaurant where we'd had our first date, and the moment felt right. "Diana Rodriguez," I said, kneeling beside our table with a ring I'd been carrying for 3 months, waiting for the right moment. "You've shown me that trust is possible again. That love doesn't have to be a performance. That there are people in this world who are genuinely good. Will you marry me?" She said yes, and for the first time in 6 years, I felt genuinely happy. We married 8 months later in a small ceremony attended by close friends, family, and a few special guests. Detective Linda Vasquez, who'd worked tirelessly on Sarah's case, Nurse Rachel Morrison, who'd risked everything to warn me, and Margaret Halverson, who flew in from Seattle with her daughter to celebrate with us. "You deserve this happiness," Margaret told me at the reception. "After everything you went through, you deserve to find real love." "We both do," I said. "You're rebuilding your life too. We're survivors, Margaret. That's something to celebrate." During our first dance, Diana whispered in my ear, "Thank you for trusting me. I know how hard that was for you." "Thank you for being worth trusting," I replied. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. I still had nightmares sometimes about finding Sarah standing over Margaret with poison water. I still struggled with trust issues and the lingering trauma of discovering that my marriage had been a lie. But I was healing, moving forward, building a new life that was honest and real. 7 years after Sarah's conviction, Dr. Whitmore's book became required reading in nursing schools across the country. The chapter about Sarah's case was frequently cited in training programs about elder abuse recognition and intervention. I received emails regularly from medical professionals, social workers, and family members who'd read the book and recognized similar patterns in their own experiences. Some of them caught abusers before serious harm occurred. Some of them were too late, but at least they had answers. Each email reminded me that the horror I'd lived through had purpose, that Sarah's crimes, once exposed, had become a cautionary tale that was actively preventing future tragedies. One email particularly moved me. It was from a woman named Jennifer in Oregon. "Mr. Chun, I just finished reading Dr. Whitmore's book, and I immediately recognized the patterns he described in my sister-in-law. She's been taking care of my elderly mother-in-law, and my mother-in-law has been mysteriously sick for months. Reading your story gave me the courage to install security cameras in my mother-in-law's room. Within a week, I caught my sister-in-law adding something to her medications. The police are now involved, and my mother-in-law is safe. Your willingness to share your story saved her life. Thank you." I showed the email to Diana, who read it with tears in her eyes. "You're saving lives, Marcus. Even now, years later, you're still saving lives." "We're saving lives," I corrected. "You, me, Rachel, Detective Vasquez, Dr. Whitmore. All of us. This isn't just my story anymore. It's a community effort to protect vulnerable people." 10 years after Sarah's conviction, I received a notification that she'd died in prison. A heart attack at age 48, sudden and unexpected. The prison chaplain asked if I wanted to be notified about funeral arrangements. I declined. Sarah Chun had occupied enough of my life. I didn't need to give her any more of my time or energy. Diana and I held a quiet remembrance instead, not for Sarah, but for her victims. We lit candles for Ethel Patterson, Robert Chun, and Margaret Halverson. We acknowledged the suffering Sarah had caused and the lives she'd damaged. "Do you feel anything?" Diana asked me. "About her death?" "Relief," I admitted, "and sadness. Not for her, but for the life she could have had if she'd gotten help instead of becoming a predator. She was sick, and she let that sickness destroy her and everyone around her. That's very compassionate of you. I've had 10 years to process everything. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just tired of carrying her shadow around. Maybe now I can finally put it down completely." And I did. Sarah's death marked the true end of that chapter in my life. I was 49 years old, married to a woman I loved and trusted, working a job I found meaningful, and volunteering to prevent the kind of abuse Sarah had perpetrated. I'd rebuilt my life from the ashes of betrayal, and what I'd built was stronger, more authentic, and more purposeful than anything I'd had before. Looking back now, 12 years after that night, when Nurse Rachel Morrison slipped me a note that changed everything, I can finally see the full picture. Sarah Chun was a predator who hurt vulnerable people for her own psychological gratification. But her exposure and conviction prevented countless future victims. The security system I'd installed to protect my home ended up protecting an entire community from a serial abuser. Rachel Morrison's courage to break protocol and warn me saved Margaret Halverson's life and became a case study in when medical professionals should trust their instincts over bureaucratic rules. Detective Linda Vasquez's thorough investigation set a new standard for prosecuting elder abuse cases in Arizona. And my willingness to face the horror of my wife's crimes and document everything became an educational tool that's now used internationally to train people on recognizing these patterns. None of us wanted to be part of this story, but we all chose to act when action was needed, even when it cost us dearly. That's the real lesson here, and it's the message I share every time I speak about this experience. Pay attention to your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. Don't assume that because someone seems kind or caring, they actually are. Don't ignore warning signs because they're inconvenient or uncomfortable. Trust is essential, but blind trust is dangerous. The people closest to us, spouses, family members, friends, can be the ones who hurt us most if we don't stay alert. And if you discover that someone is being hurt, speak up, report it, document it, even if it means destroying relationships or facing serious consequences. Because some things are more important than personal comfort. Protecting the vulnerable is always worth the cost. If you're reading this story and something resonates with you, if you're seeing patterns in your own life or in someone else's life that remind you of Sarah's behavior, don't ignore it. Check your security cameras if you have them. Pay attention to who has access to vulnerable people in your circle. Ask questions. Trust your gut. The person you save might be your neighbor, your parent, your friend, or it might be yourself. I'm Marcus Chun, and I lived through a nightmare that I never saw coming. But I survived it, stopped it, and turned it into something meaningful. That's what I want you to take away from this. No matter how dark things get, no matter how deeply you've been betrayed, you can rebuild. You can heal. You can find purpose in your pain and use it to protect others. Drop a comment below if this story resonated with you. Share where you're watching from and whether you've ever had to make the difficult choice between loyalty and doing what's right. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories about survival, justice, and the strength of the human spirit. And remember, love should never require you to ignore evil. Real love means protecting the innocent, even when the guilty are people you care about. Stay vigilant, stay strong, and always trust your instincts. Because sometimes a simple note from a stranger can save your life and the lives of everyone around you. Epilogue. 15 years after Sarah's death, I'm 61 years old. Diana and I have been married for 13 years. We never had children, but we've mentored dozens of young professionals in healthcare and social work who are committed to protecting vulnerable populations. Margaret Halverson passed away peacefully at age 88, surrounded by her family. Her daughter called to let me know and to tell me that Margaret had left me a note in her will. To Marcus Chun, thank you for giving me 15 extra years with my grandchildren. Thank you for showing me that not all people are predators and that genuine kindness does exist. You were my hero when I needed one most. May you live a long, blessed life knowing that you saved mine. Margaret, I keep that note in my office, next to Rachel Morrison's thank you card and a photo from Diana's and my wedding. Reminders that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose light over darkness, truth over deception, and courage over convenience. Sarah Chun tried to destroy lives for her own gratification. Instead, she inadvertently created a network of people committed to preventing exactly the kind of abuse she represented. That's not the legacy she wanted, but it's the one she got. And I'm proud to be part of it.